Hey guys, what's up? It's Jess. Welcome back to Roots and Refuge Farm, where I am hanging out in my toasty basement with a wonderful warm mug of chamomile tea. Today I'm going to talk to you guys about something that I get a lot of questions about, and that is about reading seed packages and understanding all of the information and the language that might be on seed packages, what to do with that information, what to do if you don't have that information. This is something that seems to have a lot of confusion around it, and I want you guys to be equipped with as much understanding as possible as you step into your gardening journey. So I wanted to cover this in a video. Now I've got several seed packages here from multiple different companies. They have different excerpts and different information to let you know what you need to do with your plants, like plant spacing and days to maturity. Very first thing that you need to know when you are sitting down and you're reading over all of these and trying to figure out when to start things, how to plant them, how to space them. Everything on this package it's an estimate, and it's also based on ideal circumstances. Like if you have a radish that says it is harvestable in 23 days, that is typically assuming that you are planting that radish in the spring, or basically in the ideal circumstances whenever it's going to have the amount of sunlight that it needs and the warmth that it needs to germinate and grow at a steady pace. If you plant the very same radish in the very end of fall, now radishes are frost hardy, and so it may germinate and grow, but if the sun is not out as much, the days are getting shorter, and it's cold and the nights are really cool, that radish may grow really slowly. So even though that seed packet says 23 days, it might take you 60 days to get a radish if you grow it through the winter, because radishes can't read seed packages, and those seed packages are based on ideal circumstances. So please understand that. Do not get super stressed out about these seed packages and what they say. This is just a general guideline, and I want to talk about all of these different things, but first I want to talk about this. This is how a lot of my seeds have come to me. These were saved by a viewer, shared with me out of their garden, and I love getting seeds like this. When I first started really getting into heirlooms and gardening, I did a lot of seed swaps, really trying to make my budget stretch, and went to local seed swaps and swapped with people online. And so a lot of my seeds came like this. Obviously, homegrown and traded seeds don't come with days to maturity necessarily written on the package. And so what I learned to do, and I say this completely not being facetious at all, was Google it. That's a great way to figure out what to do if you get a variety of seeds that you have no idea anything about. And so if you have a seed that you're wanting to learn a little bit more about, just a basic Google search like that is going to bring up a lot of information for you. If you are needing to know how deep to plant your seeds, that is a pretty simple thing that you do not have to do a search. For the most part, any seeds that you're planting, you want to plant them twice as deep as they are large. So for like a collard seed, which is tiny, I would just plant them twice as deep as they are large, which is barely a little indentation in the soil. For a bean, I'm going to go down. If you've got a bean that's this big, you're going to go down that far. And that's just like a good rule of thumb for planting things. The main concern with planting seeds is you don't want to put them way too deep, because that little seedling will break through its seed shell and it will run out of energy before it reaches the soil surface. So don't stress out about that. You don't have to worry about like reading your seed package and making absolutely sure that you get it 1/4 of an inch or 1/8 of an inch. Just keep the general rule in mind: twice as deep as the seed is wide. Another thing that I think people probably are referencing their seed packages for a lot is the plant spacing. And there's one thing here that I think is really important to understand, and I see it on some of these packages where it talks about row spacing, 2 to 3 feet. Sometimes I'll see 18 to 24 inches in row spacing. I really like actually how some people are moving to putting on their packages now. Like I noticed here, Baker Creek just says plant spacing 4 inches apart. I know in my Gardeners is very similar. It says spacing between seeds 3 inches. And I really like that because I plant in raised beds. I don't do rows, and so any sort of row spacing that might come up on seed packets for me is completely irrelevant. Row spacing is usually taken into account for market gardening or gardening where people are using equipment like row hoes and tillers and stuff like that. If you're not using any of that stuff, basically all you have to take into consideration is being able to get in between those. And so row spacing, it's just not super necessary a lot of times. If it tells you seed spacing or plant spacing, for instance, if it says 4 inches and you're planting in a raised bed, and you can just do 4 inches from anywhere around that seed is how I do it. So if I put 4 inches, I'll go 4 inches here, 4 inches here, 4 inches here, if that makes sense. Another thing that comes up that seems to cause some confusion is days to maturity. And this is confusing. It really is. The main thing that you need to keep in mind when you're reading days to maturity is you need to know how long your season is. You find that out by searching on Google again, last frost date for your zip code, the city that you live near. And you write that down. You write down your last frost date. And then you search first frost date for your zip code or your city, which is going to be your date in the fall, and you write that down. And then you figure out how many days are between that first and last day. For me, it's like 215 days, I think. I have a 215-day growing season. I live in the South, so we have a lot of warm days. Now, you can grow things on both sides of that 215 days or whatever it is for you. Those are just your frost-free days, a guesstimate of what your frost-free days are going to be. But of course you can garden on both sides as long as your ground isn't frozen. Sometimes there will be a specification. For instance, here on this Hudson Valley pepper seed, it says 98 days from transplant. And sometimes they'll go ahead and clarify that for you. And so what this is assuming is that I'm going to start this pepper inside, and 6 to 8 weeks later, I'm going to transplant it out. And then 98 days from that, obviously it's a guesstimate, I'm going to start harvesting these. And what that does is it gives me an idea if I were to live in a place that I didn't have a 215-day growing season. It would give me an idea of whether I'm going to have enough time to harvest a crop that's worth growing this pepper. If you live in an area where your growing season is 100 days, you might not be able to grow something like this without a greenhouse. Now, with that days to maturity thing here, I've got a cabbage, which says 75 days to maturity. Here's a melon, which says 90 to 110 days to maturity. Some of these don't say days to maturity at all. Basically, what you need to know on that is that if they are plants which are more commonly started inside, things like peppers, eggplants, tomatoes, those, if they say days to maturity, are usually, you can assume they're usually referencing the days from when you transplant it out to your garden. And usually they're assuming you're transplanting a seedling that's 6 to 8 weeks old. If it is something that is more commonly direct sown, like melons, cucumbers, or squash, and you see days to maturity on it, it's usually counting from when you direct sow those things. So if you see where it says, for instance, a squash might say 50 days to maturity because it's a really fast growing plant. It's saying that when you put that seed in the ground, you should have a squash in hand in around 50 days. Again, it's not super clear. The whole point of understanding the days to maturity thing is to know if you're going to have enough time to grow something. I really pay attention to that days to maturity section on a seed packet when I'm doing my planting for my fall garden, because for instance, if I'm planting another wave of squash or cucumbers, those are very frost tender things, and I need to know if they're going to be an earlier variety or if they're going to take a little bit longer, because I may have a limited amount of days that I'm dealing with that are going to be frost free. Speaking of frost, there are words that are going to come up on seed packages pretty commonly, and that is tender or hardy. Basically what that means, a tender plant is one that cannot survive a frost. If the temperature gets down to 32 degrees, even once, that plant will die. A hardy variety is one that can handle going below 32 degrees. Now, most hardy varieties, they really don't make a lot of promises past 28 degrees. That's whenever that's considered a hard frost. But there are plenty of varieties that can handle much lower temperatures than that. A lot of times your seed packets are going to have some somewhat vague planting instructions. Like they might say, sow in place about 2 weeks after last frost of spring. Really great little direction there. It tells you that you can direct sow this variety. 2 weeks after your last frost date, you're going to find out your last frost date, and that gives you an idea of when to start sowing these. And what that little instruction is telling you is you don't want to risk it being too cool at night, so go ahead and wait a little while before you sow this one directly in place. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that you can't start this seed inside. It's just saying, ideally, this is the best way to do it. I have seen seed packages that say, for instance, nasturtium is an example, an edible flower. It's a great companion plant. And I read on many seed packages for years, does not do well with transplanting direct sow. And so I did, and for I think 3 years I tried to grow nasturtium, and they just never really took off. Last year I finally thought, what the heck, they're not doing well in the garden, so I might as well just give them a shot at starting them. I started them, and I had massive, beautiful nasturtium plants last year because for the first time I decided to go ahead and start them ahead of time. So I just want to give you permission to just try things. It's okay. If a seed packet suggests direct sowing, you can direct sow. If it doesn't work for you, next year try a different thing. Remember that all of these were written by brilliant people who have wonderful gardening experience, but even the best gardener's experience does not need to discourage you from making your own experiences. So just try and figure out what works for you. Use the information on these packages as a jumping off point, not as a law that has to be followed. Now let's talk about some of the other language that might be on seed packages that I have seen can sometimes cause a little bit of confusion, or people just maybe need a little more clarity on. First off, the dates. All of these seeds have their sell by date or their packed for date. For instance, this seed packet actually says 12/31/18. So these were sold in 2018. And you'll notice that I still have them in my collection. I have not tossed these out because they're still good. I actually have seeds in my collection that are several years old. Now, I do try to use the older ones first. If I end up with like duplicates of a package, I'll try to sow out of that older package first, because germination rates can go down over time. But I get asked this so much. You don't have to store your seeds in the freezer. You can. Storing your seeds in the freezer or the back of the refrigerator can make them last longer, but it is not at all necessary for me. Freezer space is a premium, so I do not keep my seed collection in the freezer. I keep them in my basement. Now, we do have a dehumidifier running in our basement because it's a basement, and so we have to do that. We live in a really humid area, and so that probably helps my seed life. But even if I did not have that, they would still last for years. I remember in my gardener, Luke, doing a video series where he actually took some 80-something-year-old seeds, germinated them, and grew them. So understand that seeds do not just go bad after that year. However, there are regulations in place that require seed companies to pack seeds for that year and sell them, so that there is no selling of old seeds that might have poor germination. It's just something to protect the consumer. I mean, I think it's a good thing, but understand as the consumer, just because that sell by date is passed, these seeds are not expired. They're still good for years. Just keep them in a cool, dry place and you'll still be able to plant those for years. Another thing that you may see on seed packages is where they were grown or where they were packed. Now, all of the packages that I have here, I've got M.I. Gardner, Baker Creek, Haas Tools, Hudson Valley Seed Company, and Patriot Seeds. All of these are grown and packed in the United States. Now, the reason why I buy seeds from the places that I buy seeds, and the reason why I am more particular about seeds being grown in the United States is because we have laws to protect workers here that do not exist in some other countries. And a lot of seeds are sourced in countries that might rely on unethical labor, child labor, and I don't want to support those with my dollars. And so for me, I prefer to support companies that are making sure that people are taken care of, that are sourcing their seeds from small family farms and family growers. And I also just really like to support companies that are furthering the heirloom movement and the home gardening movement. There's nothing wrong with buying your seeds at local big box stores, but some of those may be from brands that overall in the higher up areas might not have the best interests of home gardeners and localized food in mind. And so for me personally, that's why I buy seeds from the people that I get my seeds from. Now, one thing that comes up a lot, and I just want to kind of clarify because this is the last thing in the language I think here gets really confusing, and that is non-GMO, heirloom, hybrid, F1, open pollinated. So let's talk about those terms. The first things first, you may see a lot of heirloom seed companies like talking about, we sell non-GMO seeds, we only sell non-GMO seeds and stuff like that. And that's true. But that's also the case. I mean, that's just the case for all garden seed companies. It's illegal to sell GMO seeds to home gardeners. So you're not going to accidentally mess up and accidentally buy GMO seeds for your garden. Now, it is true that some big national brands of seeds that you may buy in big box stores, those brands may be owned by people who are in coalition with people who are producing GMO seeds. You may be, in purchasing those, you may be supporting with your dollars companies which might not have the home gardening movement's best interest at heart. That may be true. But you're not going to accidentally end up with GMO seeds for your garden. So don't worry about that. Hybrids are sold. You can buy hybrid seeds, and a lot of times you'll see there's two terms that go with hybrid seeds. One is F1 and one is open pollinated. Now, a hybrid is not a bad thing. A hybrid, just in the meaning of that word, is cross. Hybrids happen. Hybrids happen in anybody's garden where there's wind and bees, because cross-pollination occurring between two plants creates a hybrid. And hybrids are not bad things. Any heirloom that we know and love was at one point a hybrid. Somebody created that. And with hybrids, the reason why that's gotten such a bad connotation in people's minds is because people think you can't save the seeds of them, which is really a misconception. And people also associate hybrids with being flavorless or bad in some way. And the reason for that is that whenever food, when the goal of food and when food moved out of the backyard and into grocery stores, and people started to expect to be able to get things out of the growing season of their local area, they wanted it shipped from somewhere far away, growers had to adapt to match the supply to the demand. And so they began making their crosses and trying to produce plants that would withstand shipping and that would have long shelf lives. They wouldn't spoil. And if flavor got lost in that mix, it was like, oh well, we've got to meet the demand with the supply. And that's why when you go to the grocery store now and you go buy that pale pink tomato that's gritty and watery because it got shipped from a greenhouse and God knows where, and it's been picked for however long, and why we say they taste like disappointment. And it's such a completely massively different thing than the homegrown tomato that you pick out of your garden. It's not necessarily because that tomato is a hybrid. That's not the only reason why. Now, that variety may have been bred to withstand the shipping and to grow without being sick, to produce the most, and flavor may have been really low on the priority list of that variety. But also it has a lot to do with the fact that it was grown in such a way, that it was picked unripe, that it was shipped, and that goes into the flavor being so poor. You can grow a fantastic hybrid tomato in your garden and it will not taste like disappointment. They are not bad things at all. Now, I love heirlooms. I grow majority heirlooms, but let's not hate on the hybrids. There are good uses for those, and in 50 years, a lot of the hybrids that we have today will be our heirlooms of 50 years from now. Now, the two terms that I mentioned, F1 and OP, open pollinated. F1 is first generation, so that means you took plant A and you crossed it with plant B and you got your F1 plant C. And what that basically means is that F1 plant, it's not stable. And so when people say, oh, well, don't plant that hybrid, you won't be able to save the seeds of it. If you save the seeds of plant C and you plant them, you still get a tomato. It's just not going to look just like plant C. It may look like the mama plant, it may look like the daddy plant, it may look something like the baby plant. You don't know. You'll get all kinds of variation saving the seeds of an F1 plant, but it'll still be a tomato. So when people talk about, well, you got to get your heirloom seeds for a disaster situation or catastrophic situation, for survival you need heirloom seeds. Not necessarily. I mean, if it were a survival situation, plant whatever you can, plant whatever you have. Heirlooms are definitely ideal because if you save the seeds of them, you'll get a plant that's true to the parent plant. And it's the same thing with open pollinated. An open pollinated hybrid is a plant that was bred and stabilized. It was bred so many times that it's now producing a seed that's true to the parent plant, but that hybrid variety just hasn't been around long enough to be considered an heirloom. So know that whenever you are doing your seed shopping, if you're concerned about being able to save the seeds, if you're concerned about getting into something that you don't want to be in, heirlooms are great. F1 hybrids have their uses. Open pollinated hybrids are just as good for seed saving as heirlooms are. And GMO seeds, whatever your opinion is of them, it's whatever, but just know that you're not going to accidentally buy GMO seeds for your garden. Another thing that I really like about reading seed packs, and I always read them. This is just a little embarrassing that you've made it to the end of this video. I will divulge this about myself. Whenever I get seeds in, whenever I get like a seed order, somebody send me some seeds, I'll literally take them and I'll stick them in my purse and I'll just carry them around with me, especially if it's this time of year, it's too early to plant them. And I'll just keep them in my purse just to get them out and read them. And that's probably why I remember so many little weird facts about plants whenever I'm doing garden tours. People are like, how do you remember all this? I'm like, I don't know. I hauled the seeds around in my purse for 3 weeks and read them every time I was, sitting at the school line or whatever. But it's really neat. They have really cool little bits of information that I think really will help you in planting and growing, and also it's just fun to know, for instance, like these round black Spanish radishes, possibly grown from before the 1600s, and reading stuff like that just adds interest to the garden. I really love reading those kinds of things. Here on this In My Gardener pack, they give some suggestions on how to serve it. Serve chilled with lemon or lime wedges topped with yogurt. That sounds really delicious, and it makes me really want to grow this melon. So there's lots of information. A lot of times you'll get harvesting information, like pick when the blossom end is slightly springy when pressed and sweet aroma develops. I saw here on this kale seed, harvest kale immediately after first frost. It's best to remove leaves from kale plants for cooking and salads. And so like that is a really great tip. That is not the law. Harvesting right after the first frost. I'm actually about to plant a lot of kale that I'm going to grow into the spring, so well after the frost is done. So you can break that rule, but it is, kale harvested after it's been frosted on is the best kale. And so that's where that advice comes from, but it's not a hard and fast rule. Overall, I am thankful for a good seed package, but Also, sending seeds everywhere. Also know that it's okay if you don't have that information. You can find the basic information that you need. There was one more thing. Oh, this is a really random little tidbit, and those seeds flying everywhere reminded me of it. I like to close my seed packages with washi tape. This is a tape that I just get at like the local craft store, and it's made for scrapbooking. It's washi tape is what it's called. Many of you will probably know what that is, but some of you may not. And it's just like a paper tape that's meant to be stuck and unstuck, and it is fantastic for closing seed packages that you've opened, because you don't have to tear the seed package open each time. If you can open it and then close it with that washi tape, it's really easy to peel that back. The last thing that I really highly suggest that you do is make some sort of record of what you grow. For me, I have my channel, and so I have a lot of videos that I can look back on, but I still do take notes. I have some notebooks that I'll write little notes down in, and I take a lot of notes on my phone. Sometimes I'll even take videos, like if I'm trying to remember what I'm planting where or what I'm thinking about something, I'll just take a little video on my phone that nobody ever sees that I just take for myself. Taking good notes in the garden it's really important as far as learning what you like, what you don't like, how things grew. And again, and you've heard me say this, and I will say it again and again, a little bit of experience goes a very long way when it comes to gardening. For instance, once you've grown a kale plant and you've seen how big the kale plant gets, you're not so anxiously reading that seed packet to figure out how far apart to grow those. Once you've grown them, you kind of know. You kind of think, okay, I know how big a kale plant is, so I know that I need to put these seeds, 12 inches apart or whatever. It doesn't feel so intimidating after you've actually experienced it. While the seed packets are really valuable and it's great to have those information, again, after a couple of years of doing this, you'll have a general idea. So I hope that helps you. I hope that kind of demystifies it a little bit. I hate how confusing this can be on the front end, but just like any other thing, there's a little bit of a learning curve, but once you get it, you've got it. So I want to encourage you to just keep learning and stay in the place of being a student, and you will grow. So thank you guys. I bless you. Until next time.